Here is episode 17 in my series of talks about the history of English detective fiction from 1920 to about 1960. Hello everyone, welcome along, and as always, thank you for being there. Now, as I've said before, these talks do not usually follow a sequence. Rather, they are a selection of topics, some of them suggested by listeners, which we hope will be of interest to enthusiasts for the traditional detective novel. However, coming up shortly there will be 3 talks that do share a link, as we're going to focus on the effects when crime novelists broke away from mainstream detective fiction, say from about 1945-1950. But before we explore the details of that, I need to provide a little more background, and tonight I want to talk about the place of humour in the development of our genre. Detective stories are not realistic murder stories. Any fictional exploration of a murder, a tragedy that affects several people very deeply for many, many years, makes a grim reading where it's done honestly. Yes, such books do emerge as classics, and we can think of a few, but they are taken over by the exploration of the human condition, so become something more than murder stories. That is inevitable. For people who want a real murder with a softer touch, there are, of course, books on true crime. The detective novel was never intended to meet either of those markets. Furthermore, the investigation followed by fictional detectives are not realistic. Murders are not solved by amateurs, and the professional policemen follow evidence rather than clues. So how could writers of the Golden Age present this subject as a light-hearted but time-worthy game of wits between the authors and their readers? They found that self-parody was a relief that readers enjoyed, and it brought them in on the joke. Many authors delivered this by making a caricature of the detective. Hercule Poirot immediately comes to mind, but there was also Father Brown from G.K. Chesterton, H.C. Bailey's Reggie Fortune, one of my own favourites, Gervais Finn from Edmund Crispin. Across the pond, of course, there was Nero Wolfe, fulfilling a similar role for American readers. And John Dickson Carr provided a caricature of G.K. Chesterton in his character, Dr. Fell, and it was Fell who declared, in character, "We are in the middle of a detective novel, and we do not fool the audience by pretending we are not." Even I thought this was going a bit far, and I also caught my breath when Michael Innes concluded a chapter by announcing to his readers, "So there we have your body." But, ignoring my sensibilities, this was a very effective way of setting out the stall of the detective novel. It was as if the reader knocks on a door which is opened not by a butler, but by someone in fancy dress as a butler. Clearly, we were meant to bring a bottle to the party and join in the world of the clue of the broken match. But the caricature was used not to make a clown of the detective, but to free him from the shackles of convention, so that he could deliver that contest of wits. Making Poirot's little grey cells an important part of the puppet left us in no doubt. Michael Innes brought humour to his excellent detective novels by peopling them with eccentric characters, with whom Inspector Appleby had to play straight man. Well, more or less. Ngaio Marsh's Roderick Allen experimented with the same role in several of her books. My favourite Innes book is probably Appleby's End, where the detective marries into a marvellously weird family, which provides plenty of fun fodder for the following titles. Innes was of the Donish school, which we discussed in episode 3 of these podcasts. And Inspector Appleby brings a perspective of cultural knowledge that keeps the frolics tethered to the ground. Again, more or less. For many readers, by the end of the 30s, a good sense of humour was an essential element of the detective story. Allingham's Campion and Sayre's whimsy remained popular, of course, and after the war, a late master of the funny detective novel emerged. Colin Watson's Flaxborough Chronicles mixed images of mayhem parva, stiff upper lips and post-war development with down-to-earth detective puzzles. Of course, he had the advantage that detective fiction itself then had a strong tang of nostalgia, so the parody was especially effective. Now, not everyone went down the humorous route, but those who determined to write detective novels with a straight face had to work hard at it. For example, H. Maynard Smith's stories of Inspector Frost, not to be confused with the later character of the same name, may have been procedurally sound, but they were acknowledged to be flat at the time and are difficult to read nowadays. A comparison with the books of Freeman Wills Croft, who was writing over much the same ground, may be unfair. After all, Croft was the best detective writer of the Golden Age. But the comparison does demonstrate that straight-faced detective novels must be carefully worked out because, have no doubt, these type of readers are going to pull the plot apart. They must be credible, not just possible, and engagingly delivered. Croft was able to succeed in his straight-faced approach because he compensates by majoring so strongly on the puzzle element. It is obvious from the start that we are reading a detective novel. Croft was successful because he brought an engineer's mind and, most of all, his naturally fluent voice to the book. Also, he steers away from strong characterization, apart from Inspector French, so we are not trapped into the emotion of a murder case. So, where does this get us? This need to address the unrealistic basis of a detective novel presented just one more difficulty for the weary writer. There were also many quite hard and fast conventions. There was even a convention that you should break the conventions. But more than that, by the end of the 1930s, readers had developed an expertise which soon separated the well-written books from the rest. For some, producing a well-crafted detective novel not only was rather too difficult, but also not really what they wanted to do. In later podcasts, I will look at how many writers abandoned detective fiction for the crime novel, and we'll discuss the benefits that brought for the detective fiction purist. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to episode 17 in my series of talks on the history of the English detective fiction. My name is Malcolm Noble. My website is malcolmnoble.com. I hope you take a look at it. The podcast page on that website provides a list of previous episodes with links if you wish to catch up. I need to thank Freeze Effects for the royalty-free music. I posted this podcast on the 19th of June and will upload the next episode on the 5th of July. I hope that you'll be there to listen. In the meantime, all that remains is for me to wish you a good night and God bless.